being critical of people or the things they say is not being critical of their right to say it.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the First Amendment Museum's one-on-one interview series. The First Amendment Museum is a nonpartisan nonprofit located in Augusta, Maine. My name is Max Nospish, and I'm the manager of visitor experiences. For this episode, I'm joined by Wil Thieme, a member of the Maine Democratic Socialists of America. The Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, is the largest socialist organization in the United States. The DSA is a group of people working towards instilling democratic socialism into our society. Not beholden to wealthy donors, any political party, or any board of directors, the DSA is entirely funded and driven by their members. The Maine DSA is one of 250 chapters across this country, and the only chapter in Maine. So, Wil, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Max.
No problem. So, do you think the First Amendment is important? Well, what do you think are its purposes?
I do. As we're seeing a lot these days, though, implementation is everything. The promise of the First Amendment is incredibly important, although it only restrains government action, which leaves major wielders of power and capital free to use their outsized influence in ways that leave the feeling that some speech is freer than others. I think the purpose of the First Amendment is to provide for democratic function in our country, the separation of church and state, freedom of speech, freedom of petition. All of these aspects promise to allow the people to stand up to a government that refuses to do what is right. Unfortunately, through the Espionage Act and other such carve-outs, the protections can sometimes be limited and enforcement can be politically motivated.
What is the Maine Democratic Socialists of America, and what kind of work do you all do?
So the main chapter of the DSA is a statewide member-run group of political activists, theorists, mutual aid proponents, really anyone who even vaguely associates themselves with democratic socialism. Our organization prides itself on being a so-called big tent organization where we can all work together around our similarities rather than fighting each other over our differences, which groups in various political preferences often get pulled into, these sort of divisive sort of contests, which really makes it very hard to accomplish much when you're busy fighting yourselves. Many of our members live near Portland, where we've used the popularity of our goals to enact a higher minimum wage, rent control. We began the Green New Deal for Portland. All of these campaigns would have looked dramatically different without a constitutional right to petition our government. So I think that it's incredibly vital to our work. Certainly in countries that are much more restrictive of rights, there is still pushback from people when bad things are done, but it is much harder and much more dangerous to really stand up to these issues. So I would say the First Amendment is crucial to the sort of work that we do at DSA.
Yeah, so you may have just answered this question, but does the First Amendment help you or hinder you in your activism and your political work?
Definitely help. Yeah, I would say I can't even think of any situations where it hinders us.
So one of the stereotypes that I think most staff members here at the First Amendment Museum have encountered is that the so-called left, and I say so-called left because however we want to define that, in American politics doesn't like the First Amendment, that they're against the First Amendment. And this is something I hear all the time. And I just want to ask you, do you think that's true, or why not?
Yeah, I honestly, I think I'm glad that you asked the question, I guess is how I should say it. The left, quote unquote, if you can make such a generalization, doesn't hate the First Amendment. As previously mentioned, implementation varies greatly. Censorship impacts all voices that are deemed inappropriate by our ruling system, regardless of what they're saying, what direction they're going. It's conflicting with the current system. The question is, which voices are deemed the most inappropriate and when? When thinking about or talking about these questions of, does this group support free speech? Does that group support free speech? Certainly there are groups that do not support free speech, but being critical of people or the things they say is not being critical of their right to say it. It has to do with what are the implications of this, and more so than the implications, what are the direct results of it that you can point to and say, well, this awful thing was called for, and then people did it. It's like, calling fire in a crowded theater. There are situations where when you do something under certain circumstances, it isn't just speech at that point. You're inciting something. But when criticism is made of those violent actions, it's often deflected to the protected activity. And I think that that's where a lot of this claim comes in of, oh, the left doesn't support free speech.
So beyond your work with the DSA, how do you utilize the First Amendment in your everyday life?
Well, I think to answer that question, it's useful to look to the many other societies that don't have these protections. I've seen plenty of on-the-street interviews from other countries where questions go unanswered. Personally, I feel lucky that I can voice my opinions on most topics without fear of political or much social retribution. I don't shy away from pointing blame at our capitalist system when my IT clients complain about being forced to deal with self-install kits from Spectrum, who sends them out to avoid the labor costs of sending out cable installers. I don't avoid criticizing police brutality and selective enforcement of laws. I'm free to attend protests, strikes, pickets, etc., without too much fear of violence. There's a lot of room for our freedoms to get worse, but there's also a lot of room for them to improve, especially through significant reform of the Espionage Act, which has rarely been used against foreign agents and serves almost exclusively to prosecute journalists and whistleblowers.
Awesome. So, Wil, thank you for joining us. And if anybody watching this, if you enjoyed today's one-on-one, please check out the First Amendment Museum's website and social media for more episodes. And on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to the First Amendment's channel for more.
Thanks, Max.